I want to talk about communication in this setting. And for those of you who, I know there might be about 15% of you all from the hands that maybe this doesn't tie in exactly with where you are, but it might in the future. And these are tips and ideas that I think have some bearing on any of us. And we all communicate. You communicate with your kids, you communicate with family, you communicate with other parents, you communicate in a variety of different ways. And so while this is going to deal with more of the spoken and the teaching and some of those things, I do think it's important that there's some principles that we can get from it. And what I want to talk on is 8 characteristics of great communicators. 8 characteristics of great communicators. And in my 40 years of ministry, I've seen a whole lot of things change in styles. My dad was a preacher, and boy, he'd raise his voice. And I remember Bob Russell was one of the first conversational preachers that I heard. And back in 40 and 50 years ago, boy, it was more hellfire and brimstone. It was a little stronger as far as the volume level. And so there have been a lot of different changes that have taken place. Years ago, we had a leadership conference at Southeast, and it was called the Leadership Conference. We were very, very novel. Any of y'all ever go to that leadership conference? Put your hand up if you did already. Several of you all. One year, we saw Max Lucado was bringing a group from his church. And Bob and I had not met Max, but he was bringing a group. So we called him up and said, hey, would there be any way we could do a question and answer with you in the fellowship hall during lunch? And I said, I'd love to do that. So Bob was up there with him asking him questions, and I was running around with a microphone. And one of the questions somebody asked him said, he just started writing, his books were taking off like wildfire. And so one of the questions was this. They said, do you write your sermons first, or do you write your books first? And everybody's like, that's a great question. And Max said, 90% of what I have written, I have preached. And everybody like, that's great. And I grabbed the microphone quickly and said, and that's right, 90% of what you've written, I've preached now. So and there was a lot of truth to that, too. But there's all these comparisons that are made because nowadays, everybody is available. You can listen to anybody. When I was growing up, there was Oral Roberts and Robert Schuller on TV. Okay? It wasn't even Charles Stanley yet. It was just those two guys, Robert Schuller and Oral Roberts. And then you could maybe listen to somebody on the radio. But now it's just, who do you want? Who do you want to listen to today? Who do you want to, while you work out, you listen to a podcast. While you walk or you jog, or when you're in the car riding, you break it up with listening to someone. And so I think there's different things that are taking place now that make it a little bit tougher. All that to say, we have to be better communicators, okay? The bar has been set a little bit higher because, like it or not, we get compared, our presentations, our group lessons that we have a men's group that meets on Thursday morning, and we take turns on leading it. So these guys, man, they work hard on their lessons because it's going to be very important what it is that they convey to that group because it's a group of leaders. So here's the first thing I want you to jot down. Great communicators know and understand who their audience is. Great communicators know and understand who their audience is. My talk will be grafted differently for a Christmas Eve or an Easter service than it will be for a normal weekend. My talk will be different when I'm talking to 4th to 6th graders than it will be when I talk to high schoolers. It will be different. It has to be. And so you win the battle ahead of time. Your favorable attention step doesn't have to start when you begin to say your introduction. I know my gifts. I know there are plenty of better speakers than me, better leaders than me, more spiritual people than me, but I'm going to play to my strengths. And so before I got up here to speak, I tried to talk to as many people as I possibly could. And I've done that ever since I was 20 years old. When I would do a revival or speak for 2 nights someplace, I knew, man, I got to win it early. I got to get them on my side before I even get up there. Because if I start making some relationships and some connections with people, well, then they're going to lean in and they're going to listen. I used to do speaking for companies and organizations. I had an agent that booked me for those things. And I'll never forget what this lady said to me. This was the agent. I'd worked with the Speakers Bureau with all these different people, a variety of different speakers. And this is what she said to me, and I've never forgotten it. She said, she had a southern twang. She said, darling, they're yours to lose when you get up there. Now, let me tell you what that means. They're yours to lose. When you get up to speak, in your first 2 minutes, you've got their attention. The question is, will you keep their attention? Nobody wants to go into any session, any sermon, any lesson, and be bored out of their gourd. No one wants to say, oh, okay, here we go, let's go be bored. No, they give you a chance for those first couple of minutes, okay? So they're yours to lose. And that was really good for me to know because I'm like, okay, so then it becomes, how can I keep them? How can I keep them listening? Here's what I'd love you to jot down on this first thing. Good speakers ask, what's my topic? Great speakers ask, who's my audience? When I talked to Jeff prior to this a couple of different times, I kept drilling down, who will be there? Tell me who will be there. Is it safe to say that 1/3 of them would be there? Is it safe to say this? Last night I said, what percentage do you think the guys to gals will be? Okay, that's all very important, and that plays a part in when you're writing your material and putting your things together. Number 2, great communicators celebrate and share stories that advance the vision. Great communicators celebrate and share stories that advance the vision. I love this because it touches every person in this room, is how you advance the vision through stories. And student pastors, you tell success stories. You talk about this person who went to camp last year and how it changed their life, and now they're so deeply involved in the fabric of the church. You share those stories. You share a story of a song that was written by some people on your worship team. And they start sharing that, and they start to realize, oh, they're using their gifts. I could use my gift here. All those things advance the mission. Do you know what I'm not going to put you on the spot. I thought about doing that, but I'm not. Do you know what your mission statement is for your church? I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, so don't. Do you know what your mission statement is for your church? Because that's what you are trying to advance. Okay? What's the mission of your church? That mission reveals something about what it is that you're trying to do. When I was at Southeast for X number of years, it was always, Southeast Christian Church exists to evangelize the lost, edify the saved, minister to those in need, and be the conscience of the community. Well, that wasn't really a mission statement, but those were the 4 prongs of it, all right? And so then when I became lead pastor, I said, okay, let's put that down into one phrase. And it became connecting people to Jesus and one another. Just in a phrase, connecting people to Jesus and one another. And when I took over that baton from Bob and became the lead pastor, I went to 2 different leaders of Fortune 100 companies within our church. And I asked them separately on different days at different times, far, far away from each other. I said, what's the greatest advice that you could give me as a new leader? And both of them said the exact same thing to me. Miles apart, different settings, with no conversation between the 2 of them. You know what they said? Keep repeating the vision. Keep repeating the vision. When you think they've got it, say it again. When you think they're sick of it, say it again. When you think there's no way, everybody knows it, backwards and forwards, say it one more time. So I found myself every single sermon making certain that I worked in the vision of our church, the mission of our church. and tying that in. I'll never forget when I got a snail mail letter a few months into being the lead pastor. Somebody wrote me a letter, and they were saying something. Then in the middle of it, they said, well, I know what we're all about, and what our goal is to connect people to Jesus and one another. And then they went right on. And I'm just like, oh, they got it. They got it. But you can't stop. You got to keep saying it, okay? How do you drive that vision home? It's through stories. How do people remember things? It's through stories, okay? The people have come up, around 6 of you have come up and said different things about different messages that I've preached. Every one of you, not one of you said, oh, it was when you were preaching on Romans chapter 4. Nobody said that. Nobody said, oh, it was when you had all your points, they started with P. I just thought that was so cool. It was so powerful, No, that's not what you said. Every single person tells me by the story that was told. I used to be on the radio in Louisville every morning, and I'd go by the post office. We had a P.O. box there. I'd check every once in a while. And somebody said, oh, I listened to you on the radio this morning. And I don't listen on the radio, and so I didn't know what it would be on. And so I'd say, oh, well, what was it about? And they never told me what was it about, and they never told me a text, and they never said any of the outline points. They would always say, oh, you told that story about, and that's how they remember the sermon. So we dream in stories. Stories are a part of our life. I could tell you a story. I could tell you to tell that laptop story. Remember the laptop story from Baltimore, Maryland, Phoenix, Arizona? You could tell that to a family member today, and you would get 80% of it. I promise you get 80% of it. You could tell the water buffalo story, and you could tell 80% of it. You have all the parts that you need. Why is that? It's because that's how you remember things. And so if I tell stories that show that the vision and mission of the church is being advanced, now I am subliminally telling my church, oh, I've told them what a win is for us. I've shown them this is what we say is success. Is when a person comes to Jesus Christ, comes to faith in Jesus Christ, and now we have the opportunity to deepen alongside of them. And so look for those things that you can share, whether that's in a testimony, whether that's in a video, whether that's in just a phrase that you say in your sermon, and you just throw out a story in 2 lines and say, you know what? Megan invited someone to Easter last year, and that person had no desire to come. And then at the last second, they thought, I'll try it. And you know what? There she is, sitting next to Megan a year later. And now she's a volunteer in our children's ministry. She was baptized 3 months ago, all because Megan made an invitation. What did we just do? We just held up a value that we want to connect people to Jesus and one another. We want to share the truth. Steve Reeves preached in Indiana for a number of years. Many of you all know Steve. He talks about a person in his church that had to have a delicate surgery. And the surgery was going to be working on a portion of the brain tissue where they felt like everything was going to go fine, but it could affect, if they got in there and there were some problems, it could affect either the person's memory or the person's eyesight. And so the doctor had the wherewithal and kindness to say to this woman, Christian woman in Steve's church, said, let me ask you, I don't think there'll be any problems at all, but it would help me to know which side to come in from on something. And which would you be willing to go without? Would it be your eyesight or would it be your memory? And the woman said, let me pray about it and I'll get back with you. And again, he assured her there won't be any problem, but I feel like I want to ask that question just to see what would be most important to you, and in case we ran into problems. And before the surgery, he said, you remember what I asked? She said, yeah. She said, I prayed about it and thought about it. She said, I would rather lose my memory than lose my eyesight. He said, okay. That lets me know which side I'm going to come in from, but I don't anticipate any problems. He said, if you don't mind me asking, why did you come to that conclusion? She said, because I'd rather see where I'm going than remember where I've been. And that's what your job is within the church. You are helping people see where they're going. You are that windshield that lets them know this is the direction that we're moving. Here's what we call a win in our church. All right? That's what we're shooting for. That's what our goal is. Here's your third one. Great communicators realize that the power of the presentation comes from using scriptures and stories from the Bible. Great communicators realize that the power of the presentation comes from using scriptures and stories from the Bible. Bob Stacy was my preaching professor in college. Many of you all know Bob and have been touched by his life. He used to say in our preaching class, he said, the power in your preaching comes from the thus saith the Lord. Now, we wouldn't say it that way now, but what was he saying? He was saying the power of what you say, the strength of it, the exclamation point comes from Scripture. So lots of times when I'll preach a sermon, last thing I'll do is I still manuscript. I mean, I had 19 pages up here for my last session with you guys. I'm a mess, y'all. I had 19 pages typed out word for word. Is that sad? That's just so sad. I mean, there's so many people that now, these 25-year-olds will get up there and they'll eloquently, conversationally spout off a 35-minute sermon and they've memorized it. And I'm like, that's just unbelievable to me how they can do that. But I have to, I have to type it out. This session I've got 4 pages, so I don't think it'll be shorter. It might actually be longer. Sorry. But what happens in those moments is that the last thing I do is I get highlighters out and I circle things. I circle any humorous things in pink. I circle outline things in green. And then I circle scriptures in blue. And now at a glance, I can lay out, I usually take 15 or 16 pages with me. Now at a glance, I can look at those 16 pages and I can tell if I have enough scripture. And if I don't have enough scripture, there's not enough blue, then I know I need to add some blue because the power is in the scripture. We have a young married couples Bible study at our house. It's every other Wednesday night. And we have about 35 people that come. And it's a blast. It's a great way. I get to use my gifts, and my wife gets to use her gift of hospitality and just pouring into these young moms. And we kind of team teach, which means that I kind of lead through it, and then I'll ask her for some comments a few times, and she'll throw some things in. And, last week, have any of y'all seen the House of David series? You've seen it. A few others. Anybody over here seen House of David yet? Number 3 on Prime Video. And a friend of mine made it, John Irwin and John Gunn, and it's the life of David. And it's riveting. Is that a true statement? It's powerful, and it's really well done. And, it'll be several different seasons. But it was so powerful. We showed one clip of it, and I taught through 1 Samuel 16. And, man, they had their Bibles open, and they were reading passages out loud, and we're discussing them. And all I can say is there's something that happens when you get in God's Word. And we had a young couple that came for the first time last week. And she's from a Buddhist background. And hasn't really gone to church much. And I'm telling you, my wife and I were like little kids. We were just so excited trying to explain the Bible to them. And she's all new to it. And she didn't have a Bible. And we're, giving her 3 or 4 different choices of which Bible she could use. And the next Sunday, I preach at Southeast. And lo and behold, my wife runs into her. And she had come to church after the Sunday after the Bible study. And, the odds of that are very, very rare that you run into somebody like that. And so they got to talking, and we'd given her a Bible, and she said, my husband's going to take that Bible that you gave us. And she said, this will make you cry. Because I suggested this to her. She said, we bought a children's Bible story book. And so we're reading a children's Bible story book just so that I can learn the stories. And she said, because I want to read them to my kids. And I want to know what they mean. Why do things like that happen? They happen because this is sharper than any double-edged sword. And when we share it with people, God does something. Grass will wither, the flowers will fade. Word of the Lord will stand forever. So we need to make certain that we work that in. I'm sorry, I just thought about that. It just hit me. Just to think the journey that we're going to get to go on, all these couples are going to go on with this couple and seeing them come to faith. The fourth one for you to jot down. Great communicators exude passion when they speak. Great communicators exude passion when they speak. I think you spell exude, E-X-U-D-E. I think. Is that right? Good. Yes. All right. I read a book a few years ago entitled Talk Like Ted. So you all are familiar with TED Talks. What they did was they interviewed all the people who have done TED Talks, the major TED Talks that have had the biggest followings. And then they took like the top 100 of them and they asked them a question. They said, what's the most important characteristic that you think a communicator needs to have? And the number one was passion. If you get up to say, thus saith the Lord, and you're not excited about this, sometimes my wife will say to me, I'll talk to her after a first service at some place, and I'll say, what would you change, or which suggestions would you have? And sometimes she'll say, you started a little slow. You started a little slow. And I want to always come back and say, well, I was tired. I didn't get any sleep last night, I always have some comeback, but I've learned I have no excuse. If I don't start off with passion, they're not going to stay with me. Remember what I said earlier? They're yours to lose. So that passion better come through right out of the gate. It doesn't have to be in intensity. It doesn't have to be in volume. It doesn't have to be in laughter. It just needs to be there in whatever form it lends itself with how you're starting your talk. 3 parts of a good message. This is old Aristotle stuff. Does it make sense? Is it applicable to a good life? And does it win the heart? That's logos, ethos, and pathos. They still teach that in law school, that the pathos, some people say pathos, always wins. It's the most important of the 3. That's the emotion. That's the passion. Think of it like this. Points are for the head. Stories are for the heart. And so stories allow us to get that passion across. If you ever are struggling to illustrate something, well, tell a real life story or tell a Bible story. And then when you tell that Bible story, they're learning Bible as you share it. There's some people who come across mild manner in everyday life, and yet then they get up to preach, and they're like a person on fire. How do you show your passion? There's different. You know it when you hear it. It's tough to really quantify it. But what people remember about your sermons reveals what you're most passionate about. If I were to say to you as a Bible study group leader or a small group leader or as a preacher or somebody who speaks to children's ministry, I talk to some children's ministry folks or to youth. If I said to the people in your audience, what do you love to hear her talk on? What do you love to hear him talk on? They would probably have something. If I said to those of you who are preachers, what would your congregation say they love to hear you talk about? I don't know what the answer would be, but I can promise you this. It's because you have passion when you talk about it. That's the characteristic that comes through whenever you talk about that. For me, it's generosity, it's evangelism, and it's family. Those are my three things that I'll cry just even saying them in the same sentence, just because of the fact that yes, I'm passionate about all of those. But when you preach, when you share, when you teach, what you're doing is you become the voice of God. I don't mean this in some mystical sense. I just mean you are his ambassador. He is counting on you. Christ's love compels us to share that gospel, to be an ambassador on his behalf. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 16, one of my favorite verses in all the Bible. I am compelled to preach. Woe to me if I do not preach the gospel. And if you have that call on your life to be in some type of ministry, then take that seriously and dive into it. A career is what you're paid for. A calling is what you're made for. What were you made for? Why does God have you here? How is it that he could use you? Number 5, great communicators understand what makes something funny, and they use humor naturally. Let me say that again. Great communicators understand what makes something funny, and they use humor naturally. It used to be canned jokes that people would tell. I mean, I got a million of those jokes that I used to tell. I just had a file folder where all I would do is just put the punchline down. And so if you looked at sheets of paper, all you would see would just be dozens and dozens of punchlines. And that's all I would write down. Because I would tell 2 canned jokes in every sermon that I preached. And I'd typically start off with one. Well, that's not the style of humor anymore. Now, I might use a canned joke, every 4 sermons. It's more that real life stuff that takes place. When I talk about what my grandson says, no, when you leave, I've got other friends. Well, I don't need to tell a canned joke. That's real life. And now everybody can think to what their own grandkid said the last week or what their child has said. So humor goes through different stages. You'll remember back in the Steve Martin days, it was all put down humor. Rodney Dangerfield, everything was put down, put down, put down. Now Nate Bargatze, it's just conversational humor. It's just, and we'll talk more about that in just a second. But for those of you who say, well, I'm not good at telling jokes. Well, here's where I want you to camp out. I want you to camp out in low-risk humor. For those of you who you love telling jokes and it's fun for you, then we're going to camp out in high-risk humor, okay? But there's a place for both of them. I use both of them in sermons all the time. Low-risk humor is something that is guaranteed, and all you have to do is read it, and it will be funny, okay? I'll give you an example of low-risk humor. I'm trying to think of one. John Ortberg says, John Ortberg facetiously wrote, I'd like to be humble, but what if no one notices? That's funny, right? And I tipped you off by adding the word facetiously, so that lets you know, in your mind, this is a joke. I'm supposed to laugh. You ever told something serious in church and then one person laughs and they feel really stupid and you're like, you should feel stupid, That wasn't a joke, but they are in the habit of laughing at things that you say, and so sometimes you play. There are other times where I'll say something that's supposed to be funny, and the opposite happens. They don't laugh. And usually my son will come up to me afterwards and say, hey, nice cover, because I'll try to make it seem like it was supposed to be serious. But your son, he always knows, I was trying for a laugh and I didn't get it, so you just go on serious and act like you weren't even waiting for a laugh, So you have low risk and you have high risk. High risk might be something where it's more complicated and you have to make certain that you get every single word exactly right. And, the punchline of it becomes difficult to say, and so you better have it known so you've practiced it enough that you can say it without feeling that fear. So you have low risk and you have high risk humor. Another example of low risk humor, I used to say things like back when they didn't have no smoking in Waffle Houses, I said, Waffle House is the only place where if you go to eat there, if you don't have emphysema on your way in, you will on your way out, Trying to think of other low risk humors. Muhammad Ali, at the height of his career, he's on an airplane, and the airplane's getting ready to take off, and flight attendant says, fasten your seatbelt, Mr. Ali. And he just folds his arms. She said, fasten your seatbelt so we can take off. He said, Superman don't need no seatbelt. She said, Superman don't need no airplane. Fasten your seatbelt, That's low risk humor, right? Anyone, you don't have to know how to tell a joke. All you're doing is reading 3 lines, okay? So you look for those things. I've got more high risk and low risk, but let me just move on. I'd rather talk about what makes something funny. Because for you to employ humor in your conversations with people, in your interaction with others, in your teaching, in your lessons, in a small group especially, in a sermon, what has to happen is you have to know what makes something funny, okay? So there are 3 things that make something funny. It only takes one of them to make a person laugh. Here's the 3 things: surprise, exaggeration, or truth. Surprise, exaggeration, or truth. Okay? Every time you laugh, it's because of one of those reasons, and sometimes 2. Okay? The emphysema joke, you laughed at that. Why? Well, because back in the 1990s, that was truth. You go in a place and, whoa. I'd go to a Quick Mart place somewhere, and my wife I'd come back in the car after getting a gallon of milk, and she said, whoa, did you smoke a pack while you were in there? No, you saw me. I just walked in. I promise I wasn't smoking. So that's truth. You can't help that, right? My story with my grandson, that was truth. All right? Truth is so good. Observational comedians will make you laugh because all they're doing is taking truth and different things. Now, Jim Gaffigan will take something and he will exaggerate it. All right? And he will catch you off guard with it, Bob Russell used to have a joke that he'd say, I promise you, God can use you. It doesn't matter. You might be 6'8" and weigh 120 pounds and be a girl. God can still use you, okay? Well, that's exaggeration, okay? That's surprise. It's exaggeration and surprise because you think he's talking about a guy, and then he adds the surprise in there and gets you with the girl. Probably wouldn't tell that joke nowadays, but, there's a lot of jokes that we told 40 years ago that now I'd be like, I can't believe you would tell that. So, but those are the 3 things. And so if you know what makes something funny and makes people laugh, now you have to just ask yourself after you say it, okay, why was the laptop story funny? It's because I led you along. I led you to believe that was my laptop that was being found that I lost in Baltimore. Okay? What was the surprise? The surprise is when the light switch came on with you all, is I said, they found it in Phoenix. What are the odds of that? And just like boom, 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 I just watched the room. Each one of you, oh, wait a second. Oh, that's not his old laptop. That's from the night before. What a loser this guy is. And we're listening to this guy all day long? What is wrong with us, right? But that's surprise, so it catches you off guard. So if you know those things, then you put them in. Let's look at that one more. Let me go one layer deeper with that, okay? Because sometimes you get in something. So let me unpack when I wrote that story out. At the early part, I said they called me Mr. Magoo, the absent-minded preacher. And you remember what the third one was they called me? Dementia Dave. Every one of you remembered that, okay? Now, my dad died when he had dementia. I had a grandma, same thing. My kids, do call me that sometimes when I forget things. But I've got to soften that somehow. Because if I just said Dementia Dave, and I didn't qualify it by starting off by saying real quickly, hey, can you believe they would say that? Even though I had a grandmother, okay? Even though I had a dad, and yet still they say that. So if you have someone who's suffering from dementia, it's not a funny thing to you, okay? I know that because I lived it. So I have to soften that in some way and take into account the person who right now is taking care of a parent that is struggling with dementia. So I throw that out there. Now I lump myself in the boat with them. Now they see me as, okay, well, he understands it, so they can take it a little bit better. And all of that is a setup for one line later. And that's when I say at the end, there I was surrounded by tens of thousands of fans, and yet I felt like I was in my own personal Alzheimer's unit. Okay? And you laugh at that. Why do you laugh at that? You laugh at that because, he's playing off of the fact that maybe he really is Dementia Dave. And so you chuckle at that because I'm self-deprecating and I'm taking a shot at myself, and maybe my kids were right when they called me Dementia Dave. So a lot of thoughts go into things, and you have to take into account how some people will see things. I've found that any humor always is going to offend somebody. That's why all these comedians got hacked off when the cancel culture started, is because all of a sudden they're like, hey, if we start getting canceled for stuff like that, that's all the humor is exaggeration, surprise, and truth. And so sometimes you are laughing at something and it does hurt somebody's feelings, but it's truth. And so that's why they were all wigged out on, okay, what's going to happen if we really carry this cancer culture on into comedy. Okay, number 6, let me move on. I've ranted enough about that. Great communicators regularly interact with the unchurched, or you can put with lost people. Great communicators regularly interact with lost people. I told you earlier about inviting people to come to church. I'm a better preacher when I've got guests sitting out there. Think of it like this. I see this all the time, and you do in your church too. Doesn't matter what your role is in the church. I'll be standing out there in the lobby, and I'll be shaking hands before the service starts because, again, I've got to try to win people on that front side. And so, well, he's a good guy. I guess I'll listen to him. So I'm going to do whatever I can. So I'm out there shaking hands, and all of a sudden I see a lady come walking over with a friend. And this is Susie. This is Susie. This is Dave. Dave's our pastor. Dave, are you preaching today? Yeah, I'm preaching today. Oh, you're going to love him. You're going to love him. He's so funny. You're going to love him. You're going to love him. And Susie can't stop talking. Or the friend can't stop talking because she's so excited that Susie finally came. She's tried for 3 years to get Susie to come to church. And now Susie came. And every time that her friend is looking at you, she is looking like, okay, you better be on your game. That's what her eyes are communicating. We better have the right special music today. We better have, I hope this person's leading worship. I hope this is going on. That's what she's saying with her eyes. And when she said, oh, you're going to love him. That's great. He's great. Oh, you're going to love him. We all said spellbound. We said spellbound. And she takes everything and she exaggerates it all. Now, it doesn't stop there. She goes into church sitting next to Susie. She has the deepest communion time she's ever had in her life. She prays like she's never prayed during communion because she is looking at everything through Susie's eyes. Okay? I start preaching. She's never taken notes on a sermon I've done ever. But she's got her paper out. Say that. What was that? Oh, that was good. That was good. She's writing down everything. She's nodding. I might even get an amen from her. Okay? If I tell the slightest joke, I tell Waffle House joke, emphysema. Oh, I told you he's funny. He's good. He's good, isn't he? It's funny. It's good. Why is she doing that? That's because for 3 years, she has begged and pleaded with God, please soften her heart to the point where she will say yes and she will come to a service. And finally that day has come and she just wants everything to be just right for her. When I write my sermons, I try to think of the Susies. And I try to think of the person who has planted so many seeds and scattered them so indiscriminately that maybe today is the day. Maybe this will be the day that they'll come. And just like that that Buddhist gal, that then she'll come back, and now she finds herself in a Bible study group. And I can tell you, she's going to get loved on by these people. She's going to learn God's word, and God's going to do something incredible, and they're going to come to faith. I just know it. But what happens is, if you are constantly interacting with unchurched people, you will start to look for people like that, even when you don't have a guest with you. So what you can do is, when you see someone in the lobby who has that deer in the headlights look of, okay, where do I go? You know, people who visit your church, they will come usually very early, or they will come late. They'll come late because they want to slide in and they want to slide out. And they're afraid that my dad's going to call out their name and have them stand. All right? They don't know what's going to happen at this church. And so they either come real early, and so now what happens when they're early? Now they're sitting there in a row by themselves, and everybody else is in their cliques and talking to everybody. And so what do? They just get their phone out, and they just live on their phone because that's their security blanket. What if you all? What if every one of you put a team of just 5 people together and said, you have one job every Sunday. It's to look for the person who's alone. That's all you got to do, is just go over and just make them feel welcome. All you just connect them with somebody else. Just do something so they don't have that awkwardness. In the first 13 minutes, a person decides whether they will come back to your church. Why is that? It's because they feel uneasy. And if they don't have that relieved and that tension taken away from them, they're not going to come back because they don't want to go through that again. They're going to make their mind up. So think about that. That means that if they come early and sit there and get a seat and they're waiting for the service to start, then it comes back to whether or not people greet them and are friendly with them. If they come in late, now it depends upon how the church member views them when they come in. Are they, we started 6 minutes ago. Okay, come on through. All right. No, you have the joy of the Lord, and you say, hey, come on in. Great to have you. Years ago at that leadership conference, I'll never forget, you kind of put your best foot forward, those leadership conference things, and you tell a lot of stories, success stories about the church. And there was one guy that came up to me at our early service. He said, hey, I've been here all weekend at the conference. Really enjoyed it. He said, to be honest with you, he said, it was a little demoralizing to me. I said, why so? He said, well, because, everything just seems to be going well here. It's perfect. It's professional. Everything just goes like clockwork. But he said, I just had something happen that I just love the church even more. I said, what happened? He said, I got here early. I sat in a seat, and a lady came down, an older lady, and she just stood right there and stared at me. I said, why? What did she say? He said, she looked at me and said, you're in my seat. I said, what did you do? He said, I just got up and moved down. He said, I just thought you'd enjoy the story. So he came down and told me that story before the service even started. I'm like, oh man, I can't wait to see what row he goes back to so I can glare at that woman, right? But that's just the opposite. If that would have been an unbeliever, you think that dude's going to come back to church? No way. So there's little things that we can do. I don't really know how I got off on that, but loving the unchurched. And I'll talk more about names. We will talk about names at some point this afternoon. Number 7. Let's jump to number 7. Great communicators vary their rate and their inflection. This is more for the preachers in the room. Why is this so important? Well, if you don't, then your tone, your cadence doesn't become predictable. If you don't change your rate and your inflection, everything that you read will be exactly the same, and everything that you say will be exactly the same. And then it comes to the point where everything that you're saying starts to put them to sleep because you've got that rhythm the whole way through, and you end with the exact same cadence every time. And you all have heard people who talk just like that. And they do that, and about 5 minutes in, they have lost you. You probably don't make it 5 minutes. you know. So what are things that you can do? You can vary your rate. So there are times where in my margin, I just have Q. I have Q all over it. Q just means quick. So that's a reminder to me, hey, quicken your pace there. And then there are other times where you slow it down. Bob Russell, about every fourth sermon, and again, if you do these things all at one time, David Upchurch knows all these things. He was in a preaching group to where we'd meet together on Thursdays and at Southeast, and he knows Bob extremely well. Bob would do this at the end of maybe once a month. He'd come to something, he'd look up so he didn't think he lost his place, and then he just would say, listen to me. And then he would say whatever that one line was that you really needed to walk away with. And when he let everything slow down, he'd been going at a fast rate, and then all of a sudden to put that pause in there, most mistakes that pastors make is they don't pause. They don't have the guts to pause. And a pause just shows that you are confident and you do know and you're setting something up. And the setup is where the Holy Spirit can shoot right into that heart. Now it's fertile soil, and you got a pathway into it. But he would say, listen to me. And then I don't know what the next line was going to be, but if you could see it from behind, if you'd be videotaping from the back of the room, you would have watched thousands of people go like this. And we all leaned in. Not because he was shouting, but because his next line he was going to say was going to be much softer. And everybody would lean in because they didn't want to miss it. So you learn to vary your rate. You learn to vary your inflection. I love African American churches because that preacher uses his voice as an instrument, you know, and really uses all the different things that they can, the pacing, the volume, all of those things. I did a study years ago. I just am curious as to, are the greatest preachers, do they have a rate that they go? And so I did a study, and I picked 18 different preachers. And I took 2 sermons of theirs, and I counted how many words they preached. Got a manuscript of their sermons, how many minutes they preached. I put it all down as if it was a 32-minute sermon. And it was all over the board. Max Lucado was around 2,700 words. And then there were some that were up in the 6,000s. Okay? I was around 5,400. But I also did a study of Billy Graham. And I found that Billy Graham goes about the same pace until his last 2 minutes. In his last 2 minutes, he speeds up. You say, what's going on there? That dude was passionate about evangelism. And so he's so passionate, he's so fired up about that last 2 minutes. That's what he's built this whole 30 minutes toward, is that last 2 minutes where he's going, the buses will wait. And he's going into his invitation appeal, and he's fired up because they're lost souls that he wants to come to Christ. So what I found from all of that study was that it doesn't matter how fast a person goes. There are great preachers that preach 2,700 words in 32 minutes. And there are some that are 6,800 words. It doesn't matter. It is all over the board. So I did all the work for you. You don't need to do that now, okay? Last one. And then we're going to get ready for lunch, I think. So great preachers work on the craft of editing their material. Great preachers work on the craft of editing their material. And it's not just preachers. If you lead a Bible study group, trust me, you have to know what to cut out. Because if you go on and on and on. My dad used to preach 25 minutes long. And I said, Dad, why do you preach 25 minutes when I know a lot of people preach longer? He said, I've never had a person complain about a short sermon. And he said, I want them to be wanting more. I want there to be that hunger and the desire. And so he would always preach 25 minutes. And what I found for me, my toughest challenge is if you're good at editing, I'll send you my sermon, and I pay people to help me edit my sermon down. I know AI, I'll send it to my son. He'll say, Dad, AI will just do this for you. I'm like, yeah, but they don't understand why I have to have that story in there because they don't understand what that story is setting up. So AI loses some things with story stuff, but I struggle. I'll end up with, my son and wife make fun of me because all I ever say on a Saturday is, I've got too much material. It's too long. But I learned from Bob Russell, what Bob Russell would do is he would write more than he needed, and then he would spend Friday morning and Saturday morning doing nothing but cutting and slicing it. And all I wanted were the crumbs that fell off, the leftovers that he didn't use, Everybody else stole Bob Russell's material. I couldn't steal Bob Russell's material because I was preaching the next week after Bob Russell, right? So I think there's a value that comes when you edit and you cut and you streamline and you get it down. Let me give another Bob story. My first week at Southeast, we had staff meeting, and he said, let's, there were about 8 staff at the time. He said, let's take Dave to Jenny's for lunch. I said, oh, okay, let's go to Jenny's. That's great. So I didn't realize this, but they had something called a Jenny Burger. Anybody ever heard of what a Jenny Burger is? Jenny Burger is 22 and a half ounces of ground beef. Okay? 22 and a half ounces, okay? Quarter pounder, what's that, 4 ounces, all right? So Bob says to me, hey, if you eat a Jenny Burger, then I'll buy your lunch. Well, I'm 27 years old. I'm competitive. It doesn't matter what you challenge me to. I'm gonna go for it. Oh yeah, let's do it. And so they bring it to me, fries, and they bring me a Jenny Burger. So I'm wolfing this Jenny Burger down. I got half of it down. I got half of it down in the first 5 minutes. Okay. Well, I start slowing down a little bit. Finally, it gets to the point where there are only 2 bites left. Oh, before that, about halfway through, he said, oh, you got to eat your fries too. I'm like, well, you didn't say that before. Typical senior pastor changing the rules midstream. He said, no, you got to do the fries too. That's all part of a Jenny Burger. I'm like, okay, all right, that's fine. I love fries. So I'm eating all the fries. I get all the fries down. I get down to 2 little bites, a half an ounce. That's all I've got. He said, I can't believe you did it, man. He said, eat the last 2 bites. I said, I can't. He said, no. He said, you got it, man. You've won. Just eat the last 2 little tiny bites. I said, I can't do it. He said, why? I said, because if I do, you'll have 22 and a half ounces right back at you, all right? And I didn't eat it. One of my top gifts in Strength Finders is competition. And I bailed out because I knew I couldn't even put that much in. I couldn't even put that much more in. Here's my point. Do you think your church members would rather have 22 and a half ounces of ground beef, or do you think they'd rather have a 6-ounce filet mignon? It comes because you're trimming the fat off. One's a lot easier to make than the other one, but there's a lot of pastors who are throwing ground beef out there, and they're not going to the trouble of trimming off the fat and taking the time to go those extra steps and making it to where it's actually digestible by those who are listening. Instead, they're just trying to spout and show their knowledge or not taking into account Susie, the visitor who's there, and instead they're just talking and talking. So work hard at trimming things down and go to that extra effort, and it will be worth it. And the stuff that you don't end up using, you'll use it another time. There'll be a place for it, and you'll be glad that you didn't force it where it didn't fit. Let me close by telling you, I did my internship in Lexington, Kentucky at Southland Christian Church. And that was when I really made my decision that, okay, I'm gonna go into ministry. And it, it was like an epiphany night. I'd been a pastor's kid. I'd gone to Bible college. Just finished my second year of Bible college. Done some preaching and different things. But they asked me to preach at the high school camp at the campfire service that night. And at my school, at Cincinnati Bible College, we had to keep a journal in order to get 3 hours of credit the entire summer of our internship. And so each night you would write in your journal. And so sure enough, that night, this is what I wrote in my journal. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning. Everybody else was asleep. Smelly, stinky guys' dorm room, bunkhouse with all these high school kids. And I'm up there with a flashlight, and I'm writing out my journal entry for that day. This is what I wrote. I said, I preached at campfire tonight. I said, I practiced my sermon, but I had a flashlight up there, but I couldn't see my notes, but I just went from memory. I said, in the background behind me where I preached, there were 3 crosses that were lit up. So I offered the invitation, and 5 kids came forward and made a decision for Christ. And then I wrote, I know that I will preach the gospel until the day I die. Now that was 43 years ago. I could have written that last line last week because nothing has changed. That fire is still there. That passion is still there. And I know that I will preach the gospel till the day I die. I don't know what the calling is that God's put on your heart. I don't know if he's using you in the marketplace, like he's using so many of you all in a great way. You're reaching people that I could never reach. And you're bringing them to church where they can hear someone preach God's word. I don't know if God put on your heart to be a lay leader. I don't know if he called you into ministry. I don't know what he called you to. But I do know this. He called you to something. And you have the distinct privilege and opportunity of making him happy by using your gifts for him. And when you do that and you lay them all down and say, okay, Lord, I don't know how you want to use these, but I just want to be used by you. That's when he does his best work.